I thought today would be the happiest day of my life. Standing in my graduation gown, surrounded by cheers, I checked my phone for a simple "I'm proud of you" from the only person I craved it from, my mother. Instead, her message read, "Don't expect support, you're on your own now." My breath caught, but just minutes later, they called my name, and I stepped up to receive a scholarship I hadn't told anyone about. The crowd stood, clapping. She wasn't here. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt free. And that was just the beginning. It was 2:07 a.m. when my phone buzzed violently against the nightstand. I blinked at the glowing screen, blurry from sleep, until I saw her name, Mom. My stomach twisted. A call this late could only mean one thing: something terrible, something urgent, something only I could fix. I answered immediately. Her voice came through cracked and trembling. "Emily," she sobbed. "I didn't know who else to call. I need help, just this once, please." She never actually said what the emergency was. She didn't need to. Her tone did all the work. A long pause, then came the sentence that always split me open. "If something happens to me, just know I tried." I sat upright in bed, heart pounding. I didn't ask questions. I just opened my banking app, transferred $2,000. She didn't thank me. She never did. Instead, she whispered, "You're such a good daughter. You're all I have." I lay awake for hours afterward, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many times that exact scene had played out. I had become fluent in the language of emotional emergencies. Money wasn't the point. It never was. It was the transaction of guilt, of obligation dressed up as love. Later that morning, while waiting for my coffee to brew, I scrolled through social media out of habit. A post caught my eye. A picture of my mother at a fancy restaurant, laughing, holding up a wristwatch box beside a man half her age. "Happy birthday, baby," the caption read, posted less than 6 hours after she called me crying for help. My chest tightened as the pieces rearranged themselves in my brain. The timing, the amount, the restaurant I knew she couldn't afford, the man I'd only heard about in whispers. My emergency was his birthday present. I closed the app, my hand trembling slightly, and walked to the sink. I poured out the untouched coffee. The bitterness in my mouth wasn't from caffeine. Growing up, my mother painted our family story in shades of tragedy. My father, gone before I could speak. Her illnesses, real or imagined, were used as reasons why I needed to be the strong one, the responsible one, the grateful one. Gratitude was her currency, and I owed her everything. I believed her. For years, she told me stories of single motherhood as battlefield heroism. She kept photo albums filled with my baby pictures, always captioned, "My reason to live." It felt like love. It looked like love, but it came with strings thick as chains. "If I hadn't raised you right, you wouldn't be graduating now," she'd say, as though my achievements were hers to own. When I got accepted into a university out of state with a scholarship, she cried for days, telling me she had dreams I'd get into something better, but now she'd be alone. So I stayed. I declined the scholarship. She didn't ask me to. She never had to. Years later, I learned she wasn't sick at the time. Not in the way she claimed. She'd been working part-time under the table, saving money in a separate account, a secret fund, not for emergencies, but for just in case. A life apart, invisible to me, built on my sacrifices. The more I traced the timeline, the more things crumbled. The birthday I spent alone because she had a migraine. only to find tagged photos of her at a concert. The semester I couldn't buy books because she needed help with rent, and then she upgraded her phone. All of it built on one thing: my silence. One day I sat with Jasmine, my oldest friend, in a quiet corner of our campus garden. I told her everything, not dramatically, just facts. My voice was steady, like I was describing someone else's life. Jasmine listened, then poured us each a cup of tea from the thermos she always carried. "You know," she said gently, "you've been conditioned to call manipulation love." I laughed unexpectedly, a short, sharp exhale that turned into a shaky smile. "It's messed up, right?" She nodded, but didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, I lay in bed and read our old text exchanges. Hundreds of messages. Her asking, me giving, her guilt tripping, me apologizing. The pattern hit like cold water. I wasn't imagining it. And then came the message I'd forgotten, buried deep in a thread from months ago. "Don't forget who was there for you when no one else was." My thumb hovered over the screen, frozen. My breath stopped. Was that love? Was that support? Or was that a warning? I should have been thinking about my speech, about the walk across the stage, the flash of cameras, the moment that marked the end of a long, painful road. But all I could do was keep checking my phone. Part of me still hoped she'd come, even after everything. Maybe she'd surprise me with a seat in the back row, or maybe just a message. Some version of, "I'm proud of you, baby, you did it." Instead, my screen lit up with a message that made my blood run cold. "Don't expect anything from me ever again. You're on your own now." I stared at the words, unsure if they were real or if my mind had finally broken under the weight of everything. I read them again and again, the same words, no emojis, no explanation, just finality. My name was called before I could even react. The cheers around me became muffled, like I was underwater. My feet moved mechanically, up the steps toward the stage, toward the spotlight. I felt the cameras on me, the heat of the lights, the eyes of hundreds of people, none of whom knew I had just been abandoned again. This time for good. I smiled, or I tried to. My lips shook. I could feel the tears pooling at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. I wouldn't give the live stream camera what it wanted. As I walked across the stage, I clenched the paper in my hand, not my diploma, but a folded letter from the scholarship committee I had never told my mother about. I'd kept it hidden, partly out of fear she'd sabotage it, partly out of hope that one day I could reveal it on my own terms. Those terms had arrived. The announcer's voice rang out over the speakers. This year's recipient of the Chancellor's Full Merit Award, given to a student who demonstrates not only academic excellence, but personal resilience. The room went quiet. Then louder, "Emily Cross." Applause exploded, cameras flashed, but inside me, silence, not joy, not pride, just blankness. I took the certificate with a nod, turned to the crowd, and bowed slightly. It felt performative, robotic, and yet I caught something unexpected. A face in the front row, a woman, maybe in her 50s, sharp suit, no smile, just steady eyes. As I passed her on my way back to my seat, she leaned in, just enough to whisper, "I know." It hit me like lightning. She knew, not about the award, about her, my mother, the pain behind the mask. Later, at the reception, people buzzed around me, handing me plates of cake, shaking my hand, posing for pictures. I nodded, posed, said thank you, but my thoughts were stuck on those 3 words. I know. I spotted her again near the refreshment table. She introduced herself, Margaret Pierce, the donor behind the Chancellor's Award. She said she'd read my essay 3 times, said it reminded her of herself. People think strength looks like stone, she said, holding her glass delicately. But real strength is learning when to stop holding what's killing you. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It was the first honest nod I gave all evening. As the reception faded, I slipped away, shoes in hand, out the side door into the hallway of the empty arts building. It was quiet there, peaceful. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to fix something or who needed me next. I wasn't dreading a phone call, an accusation, a guilt trip. I was alone, and somehow that felt more like love than anything she had ever given me. I took out my phone again and reread the message. "You're on your own now." Yes, I was. But maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was freedom. I didn't wake up the next morning with a plan. I woke up with questions. Heavy, gnawing questions. About what was real, about how far back the lies went, and most painfully, about how much of my life had been lived for someone else's comfort. I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt precise, like my emotions had slipped into a kind of surgical clarity. I didn't want revenge, I wanted evidence, not to convince others, at least not at first, but to convince myself that I wasn't crazy. The first step was simple. I backed up my phone. Every text thread with my mother, every voicemail, every email that hinted at emergencies and sacrifices. I created folders, one labeled emotional manipulation, another financial requests, and a third less defined, just titled Things That Feel Wrong. I started recording every phone call. I told myself it was for my own memory, to review later, but deep down I knew it was for protection. The next time she said, "I never said that," I'd have proof. At night, I printed transcripts, highlighted phrases that repeated, guilt-laced phrases, pressure-laced phrasing, the kind of wording that didn't leave bruises but left scars. And then came the slip-up. I was reviewing an old tax document she had sent me years ago, an accidental forward, she'd claimed. It included her bank details and, for some reason, a list of named accounts. I recognized one immediately. It was the joint account she had with me when I was a minor. But there was another name listed, one I didn't recognize. A separate account, same last name, different first. A quick search, a few clicks through old family emails, and my stomach dropped. It was my father's name. He'd died when I was barely 2. She always said he had nothing, left them both in debt. But this document showed that his name had been on an account that was never closed, an account she had quietly converted to her own over time, and withdrawals, dozens, starting the same year she claimed we couldn't afford heat in the winter. My breath caught. She had always blamed him for abandoning us financially, but now I realized he'd left something and she had buried it. I was about to stop, about to close the file, tell myself it was enough. But then, out of habit, I opened the email archive tied to my old Gmail account, one she had helped me set up when I was 16. There, buried under promotions and auto-forwards, was a message from my aunt, my mother's younger sister. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. My mother said she was dangerous and jealous. But the email was kind, simple. It said, "If you ever want to hear a different version of the story, I'm here." I stared at it for a long time before replying. 2 days later, we met at a quiet diner outside town. She was older now, softer around the edges than I remembered, but her eyes still carried that same sharpness, the one my mother always called calculating. She didn't hesitate. She slid a small voice recorder across the table. I kept this for years, thought one day you'd come asking. I pressed play. My mother's voice, unmistakable, calm, casual, bragging almost. No, I signed it for her. She'll never know. It's easier that way. Less stress on her. I'll fix it later. Silence. Then my aunt's voice. You forged her signature? Relax, it's just paperwork. What matters is the money's safe now. I stopped the recording. I didn't cry. I didn't react. I just nodded. Why did you keep this? I asked. Because you were the only one she couldn't fully control. I knew that one day you'd notice. Back at home, I cataloged the recording with the rest of my files. I felt like a journalist piecing together the downfall of a corrupt politician. But this wasn't a scandal. It was my mother. It was my life. That night, I booked a session with a therapist. I didn't tell her everything right away. I just said I was trying to figure out how to protect myself emotionally. She nodded, asked gentle questions, then said something that stuck. Sometimes when we grow up in war zones, we think love comes with casualties. I laughed softly. So what? I've been loving through shrapnel. She smiled. And now you're learning how to walk without flinching. We talked boundaries, not just physical, but emotional, psychological. She helped me script possible conversations, ways to redirect guilt without confrontation. But more importantly, she reminded me that healing wasn't the same as vengeance, that I could build walls without throwing stones, that the goal wasn't to destroy her, it was to protect me. Still, the file grew thicker. New folders, forged signatures, hidden accounts, witness statements. I wasn't planning to use them. Not yet. But I needed to know. If she ever came for me again, I would be ready. The next time she called, I let it ring, and I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. The invitations went out 2 weeks before graduation. I kept them elegant, gold trim, hand-calligraphed envelopes, RSVP cards tucked inside. My mother's invitation was hand-delivered. She looked surprised, then suspicious, but smiled faintly. I'm glad you're finally letting me back in, she said. I didn't respond, just nodded, like a good daughter should. The party was held at a rooftop garden downtown. Sunset washed the space in soft amber light, the skyline glittering behind white linen tables and tall floral centerpieces. People arrived dressed to impress. My professors, friends, cousins, old neighbors, and my mother, wearing a pastel pink suit, waving like royalty. She made her rounds, touching shoulders, laughing a little too loudly. I watched from across the room, sipping water slowly, letting the anticipation settle in my bones. I wasn't nervous, I was ready. When it came time for speeches, I stepped up to the microphone, thanking everyone for coming. There were smiles, flashes from cameras. I could see my mother at the edge of the crowd, standing tall, proud. She thought this was about her, about redemption, about public reconciliation. She was wrong. I've been told, I began, that the best way to honor those who supported you is to speak the truth. The screen behind me lit up. A video began to play. Soft music faded into audio clips. My mother's voice, angry, sharp, distorted with emotion. You're nothing without me. I should have left you at the hospital. You think anyone else would love you? Gasps rippled through the crowd. On screen, Screenshots of her texts demanding money, her threats, her refusals to acknowledge my milestones, her message from graduation day, "Don't expect anything from me ever again," appeared in bold font. I turned away from the screen and faced the crowd. "This is the version of love I was given," I said calmly. "I believed it for a long time. I excused it, hid it, protected it. But I'm done hiding." The video ended. Silence fell like a curtain. Then slow, unsure applause. A few heads nodded. My former roommate blinked back tears, but not my mother. She stepped forward, voice loud and trembling. "That's not real. She edited that. She's always had a flair for drama." I didn't move. I didn't respond. But someone else did. My cousin Hannah stood from her chair. "You did the same to me when I got into college," she said. "Told me I didn't deserve it, that if I left, I'd be nothing." More whispers, murmurs. Then another voice, my uncle. "You told my wife she was faking her illness for attention, said she was draining your energy." The room was shifting. The walls she'd built were crumbling. She looked at me one last time, red-faced, eyes wide. But I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I left the stage and walked away. Later that night, the messages started pouring in. People who had seen the video. Someone had uploaded it to Instagram, asking if I was okay, offering support, sharing their own stories. A few even apologized for not noticing sooner. I didn't reply to most. I needed time. But one message stood out, from a name I hadn't heard in years. Michael Reeve, my mother's ex, a former banker. They'd dated when I was in high school. I barely remembered him. Tall, quiet, always looking like he knew more than he said. His message was short. "I've been waiting for this day. Let me help." The next morning, we met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were printouts, bank statements, transfer receipts, a notarized affidavit. "She opened 3 accounts using your name and social security number," he said. "She funneled money through them, claiming she was investing for your future." My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. "She bragged about it once," he added. "Said you'd thank her one day. I kept the records. I didn't know if I'd ever use them." I added the papers to my file. By the end of the week, I filed for a restraining order and initiated a fraud complaint. My lawyer called it a clean, strategic case. No emotional outbursts, just evidence. Of course, my mother fought back. She went online, posted rants about my mental instability, claimed I had stolen from her, threatened her, that the video was deepfake technology. She messaged family members, twisting the narrative, rewriting history. But the damage had already been done. I posted a single statement. It wasn't long. Just a scanned copy of the court documents and a simple sentence. "This is not about vengeance. This is about protection." Support poured in. Still, I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't smiling. I felt clean. Like the house had finally been aired out after years of poison. I walked into the living room that night and stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't recognize the girl in the glass. She looked older, sharper, calmer. I didn't feel like her daughter anymore. And somehow that felt like the truest version of freedom I'd ever known. I didn't go on television. I didn't give interviews. I didn't even respond to the messages pouring in. Not the angry ones, not the apologetic ones, not the curious ones. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. I let the evidence speak. I let the court speak. And most of all, I let her unravel herself. The more she tried to scream over the truth, the louder her desperation became. Screenshots were shared, videos reposted. Her attempts to correct the narrative only confirmed it. There's something about watching someone lie publicly after you've already shown the receipts. It's like watching someone fight their reflection and lose. I never once posted her name. Not once. But the people who needed to know knew. Quietly, without confrontation, my extended family began to sever ties. It started with an aunt who unfriended her on Facebook. Then a cousin removed old family photos. One by one, the connections disappeared. Not with anger, but with quiet embarrassment. Not hatred, just distance. A gentle, unspoken exile. That silence was its own kind of justice. I kept to my routine. I worked, I studied, I breathed. I walked to the market every Saturday and bought myself sunflowers. I kept my phone on silent. One afternoon, I checked my email out of habit. A message with the subject line, "You don't know me, but thank you." It was from a university sophomore in another state. She had seen the video online. Read a blog post that mentioned my story. She wrote, "My mom used to tell me I'd never survive without her, that I owed her for my life. Your story helped me see that what I thought was love was really fear. I'm staying on campus this summer, first time ever. It's terrifying, but also it feels like flying." I sat with that email for a long time. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. What could I possibly say to someone who already understood it so clearly? Instead, I printed it, tucked it into a journal, carried it with me for weeks. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about the ripples. But that didn't mean I didn't have work left to do. The day I changed the locks on my apartment, I held the new keys in my palm for a few extra seconds. They felt lighter than I expected. I'd had the locks rekeyed before, but this time it was different. This time no one else had a copy. No one could just walk in. No one had unspoken permission to cross boundaries I hadn't given. That night, I slept with the windows open and dreamed for the first time in years without waking in fear. In the weeks that followed, I filled out an application for grad school, clinical psychology, emphasis in trauma-informed care. Not because I wanted to become someone's therapist. I wasn't sure yet if that path was mine, but I wanted to understand the machinery. The blueprints behind people like my mother, the cracks in logic that make children excuse pain as love. When I hit submit, I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, the kind of peace that doesn't need celebration. Orientation day came with nerves, of course, new faces, new professors, a new chapter in a place where no one knew my history. I wasn't the girl with the scandal. I was just Emily. In a group exercise, we were asked to stand in a circle and share a word that defined the last season of our life. People said things like transition, growth, healing. When it came to me, I said permission. They waited for more, but I didn't give it. I didn't need to explain. I walked home that evening through a quiet campus path. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. Students laughed in the distance. I stopped in the middle of the quad and tilted my head to the sky. For the first time in forever, I smiled. Not a performative smile. Not one to reassure others, just one for me. And it didn't come with guilt. The moving truck pulled away as the sun dipped below the trees. I stood on the porch of a small brick house, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where no one knew my name. The lease was in my name only. No co-signers, no shared accounts, no hidden attachments. The silence didn't scare me anymore. I had changed everything: address, phone number, banking details. The accounts tied to her name had been closed. The number she used to call from? Blocked. I had even removed the emergency contact from every form I filled out. No more mother by default. No more illusions. Zero contact wasn't just a boundary. It was a lifeline. I unpacked slowly, letting the new space breathe around me. No pictures on the walls yet, but I didn't need them. The emptiness wasn't loneliness, it was potential. In the first week, I started recording the pilot episode of a podcast. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't name names, I didn't scream. I called it Blood Isn't Loyalty. Just me, a mic, and the truth, spoken calmly, thoughtfully. I talked about patterns, about guilt, about the confusion of loving someone who hurts you. I spoke to the girl I used to be, and apparently to thousands of others. The podcast quietly climbed charts I hadn't even submitted to. Listeners emailed me with their stories, their escapes, their unfinished letters, but I never told them what to do. I wasn't a guru. I wasn't a brand. I was just someone who survived and decided survival wasn't enough. One afternoon, I sat on the back porch with a book. The sky was soft and gray, the breeze warm. I read a few pages, closed the book, then just sat. No one was crying, no one was yelling, no one needed me to fix something. It was the kind of peace so gentle, it almost made me cry. But I didn't, I just let it exist. Sometimes healing doesn't feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it just feels like a quiet room with no alarms. Months passed, the podcast grew. A publisher reached out. "Your voice is so clear," they said. "It cuts through the noise." I wrote a book, not a memoir, but a guide, a blueprint for those walking out of the fog of toxic family ties. It wasn't about revenge, it was about rebuilding. Then came the TED Talk. Standing on that stage, red dot under my feet, lights warm on my face, I spoke to a silent crowd about what it means to redefine family. Not by blood, but by respect, by care, by choice. The talk went viral, views in the millions, offers poured in, talk shows, brand deals, interviews. But I declined most. I didn't want to be famous for my pain. I didn't want to be reduced to the girl who exposed her mom. I wasn't anyone's cautionary tale. I was just me. The invitations kept coming. I kept choosing quiet. One autumn evening, I attended a lantern festival held by a local women's collective. There were people of all ages walking barefoot on dewy grass, each holding a paper lantern. Some carried names written on theirs. Others held blank ones. One woman sang softly into the wind. They gave us pens, asked us to write a message to a past version of ourselves, then send it away. I sat cross-legged on the grass, lantern in my lap. "Dear Emily, I'm sorry you thought love meant shrinking. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were always enough. You still are. I love you, always me." I rolled the paper, placed it inside the lantern, and joined the slow procession to the water. We lit the lanterns. One by one, they lifted into the sky, floating like soft stars, carried by flame and forgiveness. I watched mine rise, eyes stinging from the wind, or maybe something else, and in that moment, I knew. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was my own woman now.